first component starts now. Haynes is a very free-spirited person, or at least that is how she appears. She cares very deeply about what we can do to save our environment and about the preservation of literature. Those topics are very apparent in her writing. My partner Jalen Thomas and I came to interview her on her poem titled If Poetry Did Not Exist. She wrote this poem in 2013 and published it in the Kudzu Review. The purpose of this interview was about learning more about the content of her poem, her writing process, and her inspiration. Haynes' poem reflected upon the curse of technology, the corruption humans have upon the environment, and how poetry is the greatest construct of all. She talked to us about how she thoroughly enjoys writing about these types of issues because it brings awareness to them, but in an interpretive and imaginative way. Ironically, the initial idea for this poem came from an oil spill seen on TV. When she sat on the couch and watched the horrific event on the TV, she sat next to her partner, now her ex-partner, in their apartment. They spent time on the couch sharing ideas and went and expressed their ideas to their poet group a few weeks later. The published poem is slightly different from the original. She said there was a lot of inside jokes when she originally wrote the poem, or like just inside, not jokes, but like inside knowledge when she'd written the poem, and so she edited some of those parts out to make more sense for a larger audience. In addition to the oil spill, inspiration was drawn from famous poet Percy Shelley. He once said, "Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world." This is where her message about poetry became so powerful came from. While governments and empires rise and fall, poetry remains the same and provides an outlet for those with a message. She went on about how poetry is one of the strongest constructs there is and how it has been around for centuries. One could hear the passion in her voice when she spoke about the importance and preservation of literature and the arts. As each question was asked, Haynes had a smile on her face. She enjoyed my partner and I's inquisitive nature about her poem. We were most interested in the overall message and writing process of her poem. She explained that she's been writing since she was a young girl and it's always come easy to her. Poetry gave her a voice, and a large audience can interpret her poetry however they want. She said that she felt this poem could reach out to a young audience that is consumed by technology and is somewhat separated from the outside world. While taking sips of her coffee and eventually opening her can of Diet Coke, Haynes went on about her love for poetry and why the messages she delivers in her poem are so important. There was no need for my partner and I to ask many questions. Haynes thoroughly enjoyed talking about her work and answered many of our questions in just one answer. I took notes and listened as I was inspired by her passion for her work. I left her office that day with a smile on my face. Leslie Haynes is a happy and free-spirited person, and her attitude about life is infectious. I closed the door to her office and reflected on the wonderful interview we had. Haynes and I talked in many emails before and after the interview, and I think it's fair to say I have a newfound appreciation for poetry and all the powerful messages it can convey. Now, the second component starts now at 3:30. Starts now. The second component. The process for this story began when I read the works of Robert Manning and Robert Imagina, where they both interviewed Ernest Hemingway. I liked the style of both these interviews and the descriptive imagery of them both. The living room was nearly 50 feet long and high-ceilinged, and it talks about Hemingway's small but choice collection of paintings, a few trophy heads from the African safaris. While Haynes' office is not as eclectic, I like that I can envision myself with Hemingway in his home while reading this piece. It felt like a story more than an interview, which was the initial point of this prompt in the beginning. I wanted the same descriptive imagery throughout my story and did my best to describe every detail. I wanted to compare Manning and Imagina's interview stories because I find them to be quite similar. Both used a lot of dialogue from Hemingway himself. When the reader reads the words of Hemingway, they can almost envision themselves as the interviewer. However, so much dialogue, to me, feels more like a straight-cut interview more than a story. However, what made their pieces a story was their descriptive imagery and their clear beginning, middle, and end. They express the process before the interview, what the interview was like, what was said, and a recollection of the events after. I tried to include that in my story to make it flow. I emailed Leslie Haynes before the interview and briefly discussed her piece. Then I conducted the interview, and then I collected how I felt. During my interview with Leslie Haynes, there was a brief moment where she left to get a cup of coffee, and at that moment I decided to take advantage of the situation presented to me, and I took photos of her office space for further recollection that I could use in my imagery for my writing. She had collections of books from authors and poets that inspired her, such as Percy Shelley. Her rainbow tote bag and painted CDs reflected her bright, free-spirited personality, and her minimalistic style translated in her poetry. Her poetry is fairly short and to the point. While it may have some descriptive imagery, however you interpret the poem, the central message will always be made present. For the style of this story, I wanted to be very direct. The way I write is direct because I want my pieces to make sense no matter who is reading it. I kept it short and to the point with additional imagery pieces so the reader can somewhat imagine themselves there. I appreciated that in the works of Manning and Imogena, they use the word I. It's much easier for someone to imagine themselves there. Like, I can imagine myself better when they use I because I can put myself in their position. Therefore, I use that in my story as well. And additionally, in their works, they incorporated some side characters, and so therefore I included my partner, Jalen Thomas. However, I only mentioned it briefly because this is my point of view, and I'm talking, it's mostly about Leslie Haynes and her poem, so therefore I just focused on that. And yeah. And now, 650, third component to talk about this whole class. English is not my favorite subject. I think that has been made quite apparent, but I will say that all the assignments that I've been given have allowed me to maybe analyze work more than I would have in the past. I will say that all the readings that we've had are not my favorite. I don't love reading, but if I had to choose, things I like to read, like Agatha Christie stuff, I like to read mystery stuff. That stuff makes me excited. Romance novels, different track, but that stuff I really enjoy. And maybe if our course could have incorporated stuff like that, that would have been nice. But I understand this is not just a fun, book club class. I'm getting off topic, but you get the point. This class and the previous English 1101 class has allowed me to see that there is a writing process. However, there is not one writing process. Everybody has their own writing process, and this was that. I had to describe my reading process, and it's nice to compare different works and see how they all relate. And what I really liked in this course, even if I didn't express it, was about creating new genres. And when I wrote, it was in the midterm, and we were talking about how genres and writers correlate, and I talked about like a bee and a flower. That made a lot of sense to me, and it's cool to learn about how new genres are created and how each writer has their own writing process, so I enjoyed all of that. If I had to give advice to somebody in the future, I would just say to read, to really read the works and take notes. It helped me when I could take notes to the side of an assignment. Overall, I wouldn't say that this class has helped me love literature and love English, but it has allowed me to have a new understanding about it, and I'm appreciative of that. So I thank you for being a good professor and teaching me all this stuff. And I didn't love this project, but it was challenging. At the end of the day, everyone loves a challenge. I love a challenge. So I'm appreciative of this challenge. Thank you.